I've not become a millionaire doing what I'm doing, but I've had more experiences and met more interesting people than 99% of people ever will. Who cares how much money I have because I've got those experiences. That was actually the best thing that ever happened to me was the financial crisis.
Welcome, Ralph, to the show. It's great to have you on.
Glad to be here. Thank you very much.
So, my first question is just you mentioned when you graduated with a degree in business, I believe, you bought a restaurant and started running it. So, how did you afford to buy a restaurant as a fresh college grad? And what made you decide to go into the restaurant business, which I hear is very hard with long hours?
Yeah, for sure. So when I graduated from Indiana University School of Business, I had no idea what I really wanted to do. My family, my parents were second generation restaurateurs. So I grew up in the restaurant business. And so they had fast food chicken restaurants, sort of like maybe Kentucky Fried Chicken here in the Chicago area. And so I grew up in that business. I managed their restaurants. And as I was deciding what to do upon graduation, I just didn't feel like I wanted to get into the traditional, Procter and Gamble or Accenture type uh, of job. And so my dad actually found this restaurant in our hometown. It was a tiny little place that was for sale. And so it was actually a place that had been in the town for at least 16 years at that point. So I used to go there as a kid. So I knew the place, and the way I was able to afford it is my parents co-signed a loan for me, and so it was pretty easy. There was no money down really. I just needed to make the payments, which the restaurant was already a going concern, so it had cash flow, and I was able to do that. So that's how that happened.
What was it like running the restaurant? What was your experience like the first year?
Yeah, as a 21-year-old kid just out of college, it's a lot of responsibility. It wasn't a restaurant that was like breakfast, lunch, and dinner 7 days a week, like you might expect some restaurants. It was more of a lunch only 6 days a week. So it wasn't the incredible hours that I was used to in my parents' business, but it was in that sense it was a little bit easier to run. But still, it was a small business, and you're 21 years old, and it's a lot of responsibility. I've got employees, selling something that could potentially make people sick if you get them ill, and so. Um, and just having to be there 6 days a week and, running employees and having to get supplies and things. So it was a lot of work, but I enjoyed it, and it was a nice little moneymaker.
Cool. Yeah, I'm glad to hear you enjoyed it. So, what was your transition from that into your next career?
So I ran that for a couple of years, and then I ended up selling it to my cousin who was working for me at the time. And I decided at that point to take a round the world trip. And this was back in 1988. And so I sold the business and I embarked on a 5-month round the world trip by myself. And that was absolutely incredible experience. But at that time, 1988, before the internet, before cell phones, trying to get information about where I wanted to go and just tickets and everything like that was, all snail mail, really, or phone calls. And so it was a lot more difficult to set up that kind of a trip. But, I didn't know what I didn't know because obviously we didn't have the internet at that time yet. So it was just what we had to do at the time. And that was, as you could probably imagine, one of the great experiences of my life, traveling around the world for 5 months. And I bought a round the world plane ticket, and that allowed me to choose the destinations I wanted to go beforehand. But then when I wanted to leave a place, I just called the airline and said, I'm ready to go. I want a ticket. Is there room on such and such a flight? And I left. So it was nice and flexible. You didn't have dates for every single flight. But I ended up going to about 15 countries on 5 continents, um, from New Zealand, Australia, Hong Kong, China, Bangkok, and throughout Europe.
Cool. And what are some of the biggest lessons you learned from the 5 month trip that you could share with us?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was 24 years old at that time, and there's a lot of lessons about just sort of meeting strangers and being in a new environment and learning how to adapt, different languages, trying to get along. We didn't have Google Translate and things like that. I sound like an old man, but it was, just it was a life lesson for sure. I mean, having to travel around the world, get from place to place, deal with different languages, sometimes different alphabets. Like in Thailand, they have a completely different alphabet than we're used to in the Western world, and so dealing with that. So it was a great experience, and I think it really prepared me for what I'm doing today, most certainly, and definitely made me want to get in the travel industry at some point. But I always thought that being able to get paid to make money from travel was about as likely as my becoming an astronaut or a rock star.
Yeah,
I wish
the beautiful thing. Yeah,
I was
go
just
ahead.
going to say that we didn't have the internet. Of course, I keep mentioning that. I'm sorry, but when I met people, we would write down each other's names and physical home addresses, and unfortunately, everyone's moved by now, and I've only kept in touch with one person from that trip, and I met them about 6, 7 years ago for the first time in about 30 years after that trip. And so I'm glad to have that one person that I was able to keep in touch with. Not like today where we just share an email address or a phone number that's always with us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And today with the internet, so many, like millions of new careers are being created. So there are so many creative ways to monetize on your dreams. And it sounds like you've figured that out. So what is your sort of current career and how is it, how did you build it out to be, sort of a unique culmination of your dreams?
Yeah, so about let's see, we're in 24. Back in 2001, 2002, I will call it sort of the dawn of digital photography. And I've always been interested in photography, enjoyed it, but it was all film back then. But then these new digital devices came out, and I thought that there would be a market for someone to teach people how to use their new digital devices. And so I wanted to create some photo walking tours that I could take people out, show them how to use their new cameras, and they would pay me to do that. And so I started doing that very slowly. I had a restaurant from 2000, my second restaurant from 2001 to 2004, and I was coming up to the end of my initial 3-year lease, and I had to decide if I was going to sign for another 5 years or sell the restaurant. And I wanted to get out of that business. That was a little bit tougher one. I opened right before 9/11 happened, and I was downtown Chicago. So business was tough being in a big city where, everyone was thinking, well, could Chicago be next after New York, one of the bigger cities in the world? So I decided to sell the restaurant, found some buyers, and little by little started creating these photo walking tours and learning how to teach people to use their new cameras and digital devices.
Perfect. And then how did that transition into you sort of becoming a travel guide for people internationally?
So yeah, so I wanted to create these tours, and I thought that Chicago would be a good place to do it because it's such a beautiful city and there's a lot to see. And I had laid out a bunch of different like 2-hour walking tours. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, well, maybe Chicago's not the best place because winters can be tough and people are likely not to be here in the winter. And so I wanted to do it somewhere where I could do it year round. And so I ended up moving back to California, which I had lived at in between there. And a friend of mine had a financial advisory. So he had a brokerage firm and he said, why don't you get your licenses, come out here and work for me? And so, I didn't just took that excuse to move out to California and got my licenses. But at the same time, I was teaching photography, mostly how to see, how to take these digital devices and make the best use of them, not necessarily teaching the nuts and bolts of the cameras anymore because other people were doing that. So I used to get these like quarterly pamphlets in the mail about adult education programs. And they were teaching all kinds of things. And there was one person that was teaching how to use your digital camera. And so I said, well, I don't want to have to compete with that person. So why don't I teach people how to see, how to do composition and make the best use of the camera. Let him do the technical part, and I'll teach people how to actually take the photographs. And that worked out really well. So I started teaching how to be a travel photographer. And to be honest, at the same time, I was becoming one. I mean, I wouldn't have considered myself a travel photographer back then, but as they say, you kind of just have to be one or two steps ahead of your students, and so that's kind of what I did for a while. And then we had that was 2005 to 2008, and then in September of 2008 we had the financial crisis. And the next day was the day that I decided to go full time into doing tours and teaching travel photography. So that was actually the best thing that ever happened to me was the financial crisis, because it really gave me the kick in the pants that I needed to make this happen and to really go all in on this and to burn the bridges and say, I'm going to make this happen. I think sometimes when we give ourselves an out or make excuses, then it's easier to give up. But I said, you know what, I'm going to make this happen no matter what. And I was able to do so. So I started doing just local 2-hour walking tours in the local area, then half-day tours. Then we did some trips to like Joshua Tree National Park, Death Valley, overnight trips. And then I started bringing groups back to Chicago so that I could get a free trip home and show off my city. And I didn't realize how many people hadn't been to Chicago. And so it was just a great place to do that and to get these free trips home. And then eventually I did my first international trip, which was to the Central European Christmas markets. And that was a really fun trip, but we were part of a bigger group. So a tour company, a big tour company, approached me and asked me if I wanted to bring a group onto their trip. And I didn't know what I didn't know at the time, but we went on their trip, but I realized that that wasn't the way to go because I had no control over pretty much anything. Because, we had to come and go when they went, you're part of a bigger group of 40, 50 people. I didn't like the big group idea. They weren't traveling with photography in mind. So, we'd often get to these places in the middle of the day with the worst light and, who knows what else. So it was a good lesson to learn what I didn't want these trips to look like. So I started creating my own trips where I had more control and I could say, we want to be out earlier, stay out later, avoid the middle of the day, go to certain places, things like that. So that was a really good lesson as well. And then come to today, about 16 years later, I've done over 120 international multi-week trips with groups, over 1,200 people on my trips. And so I like to say that I create once-in-a-lifetime travel opportunities for people. And they've it's a great life to be able to live traveling the world, get paid for it. But it's like anything, it has its pros and cons as well. It's not the perfect life. Nothing is. So, but I can't imagine doing anything else, and I don't think anyone's going to feel too sorry for me.
What are some of the favorite destinations you have taken your clients through?
Well, some of my top destinations that I love are Cambodia, India, the Republic of Georgia. Just went to Antarctica for the first time a couple months ago, and I really enjoyed that. Something that was just out of this world. And you go there and you just feel really isolated. You feel like you're really in the natural world. There's not another man-made structure anywhere except for the ship that you're staying on. When you go to land or when you're floating by, there's no antennas or TV towers or buildings or fences or anything like that, airplanes. So it just felt so natural and real and pristine and wild. So that was one of my greatest experiences. Spain, though, too. Spain is one of my favorite places. I may actually move to Spain or Portugal in the next year or so. So I speak Spanish. My background is Spain and Mexico, so I feel very comfortable there, and I just love the culture, the food, everything.
Awesome. Yeah. What are next plans for your business? Do you plan on having any other arms? Like I saw you just made a book. Do you plan on like designing any courses, anything like that?
Yeah, so I actually created a course called Tour Organizer Training, Get Paid to Travel. And that was a course a lot of people ask me, how can I do what you do? So I created this course about 6 years ago, and it did pretty well, but then the pandemic hit. And so the pandemic really crushed me for a while. As you can imagine, one man travel business, all international, and then people can't even leave their own homes for a year and a half, 2 years. So that was tough. So I did have to pivot. I did, in some ways, I welcomed it because it allowed me to do some things that I wasn't able to do when I was traveling really hardcore. Because typically I'm on the road 8 or 9 months out of the year internationally leading these trips all over the world. And it's wonderful, but there's a lot of time getting back and forth and planes, trains, and automobiles and things like that, being with groups for a week or two at a time. There's not much other time to plan future trips or to write a book, or I wanted to start a YouTube channel. So when the pandemic hit, in a way it was welcome because it allowed me to create the YouTube channel that I'd been wanting to create for a while, to write some books, to get things organized that were a little bit out of whack. So, but to answer your question about the future, yes, I just recently released 2 books. One is called 60 Affirmations for Travel. The other is a Gratitudes edition, and they're part of a series that I've created called The Mindful and Intentional Traveler. And the reason I created this was because I needed it. And what I mean by that is, especially as photographers, and most people are some sort of a photographer because we've all got these cameras in our pockets these days. We tend to see these places through the viewfinder of a camera. And so I started to think that, was I really in these beautiful places that I went to? And of course I was there physically, but was I there mentally? Did I just go there to take photographs and videos? Was I appreciating being in the place? And it went back to a trip that I took when I was in high school. I was 16 years old, and I went with my group from my high school to Peru. And we volunteered down there to We put the roof on a school. We carried rocks for the foundation of a hospital, and some different manual labor type things, just young boys doing that. And it was a 6 week trip. And here we are on the other side of the world, literally, young boys from Chicago. And so we started to maybe complain a little bit about, yeah, I miss my mother's food. I miss my friends and family, my bed, things like that, as young kids will do. And so the teachers on the trip, the people that were leading the trip, I think they were getting a little tired of us moaning all the time. And I can certainly understand that. But one of the things that one of the men said was, be here now. And those three words really resonated with me and have all this time. And it's so important because we go to these amazing places and then here I am thinking, God, I wish I was back home, or I wish things were more like back home. And, when you're young, you don't know enough that's probably not the right thing to do. The reason we travel is to go places that are different, that we can learn a new culture, learn a new outlook on life, a new perspective. And so the more I travel, the more I think that the more I know, I just love to sit in a cafe and watch the world go by, sit in a pub, have a beer and talk to the local people there. Slow it down. And so these books are meant to make you a more mindful and intentional traveler. So to be here now. And it doesn't, you don't have to be halfway around the world. You could do this at home too. Sometimes, and it really comes down to this digital age for sure, because we've got these smartphones and tablets and TVs and computers that are made to take us away from where we are. The information of the world is in our pockets, and I love to learn, and I love to learn about other places, and to sort of escape sometimes just by looking at my phone or my computer, but it really takes you out of the present moment. And especially when I'm traveling somewhere and I'm in an amazing, very different place, I want to be there. I don't want to be on my phone somewhere else. And for me, it's different too, because when I'm on a trip, I'm with a group, let's say in Cambodia, but I'm getting emails from someone about my trip to Antarctica. And then I might be planning a trip to Vietnam. And so sometimes I wake up and I don't even know where I am, or I have to stop and think, where am I? Because my mind is in those places so much, in these other places. And so it's about being present and, just feeling where we are, smelling the destination, hearing the sounds, seeing the sights, touching those things, and tasting the food. How often do I, let's say, and I'm sure I'm not alone, but I watch TV and I'm eating, and you can't really do two things at one time well. And so either I'm watching TV and I'm not enjoying my food, or I'm enjoying the food and I'm missing what's on TV. So it's this idea that we can't all be in more than one place at one time.
You also touched on something really insightful there. The behavioral economist Daniel Kahneman has a really good talk on this, where he basically posits that we have two selves: an experiencing self and also a remembering self. And he said often when we go on vacation, we prioritize our remembering selves over our experiencing selves. So we'll take pictures and we'll try to frame the memories in a certain way, but in the process, we sacrifice the actual experience. And he posited this question, which was, what would be your ideal vacation if you would retain no memories, no photographs from that vacation? How would you plan it?
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know that name. I would love to. Maybe you can email me that name. I'd love to look into that outlook. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, I'll email you
That's a
his
big
TED talk. It's
question.
really good. Yeah, and when you
TED
explore that
Talk.
question, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
he has a TED talk on that. Yeah, I'll email it to you. But when you explore that
Mhm.
question, you start to realize, oh, I do live for the photographs and the memories. And even if you look at like weddings, right, the way the wedding runs, a lot of it is for the photographer and for the future
Yeah,
self
absolutely.
rather than the experiential self. So I think your entire series of work is really good because in a very real sense, there is nothing but the present, right? Even when we are
Absolutely.
anticipating the future or remembering the past, it's in the present. So we really should value the present moment.
Yes, absolutely. One of my favorite recording artists is Robbie Robertson, and one of his songs, he says, "What about now? Forget about tomorrow. It's too far away. What about now? Forget about the past. It's gone. We only have now." And so I'm fascinated by that idea, and I think these things come to you the more you get old, as you get older. And so I'm a little bit older probably than you, and as younger folks, everything's just perfect. But as you get older, you start to reflect and understand the value of that. The first book I wrote was called 101 Tips for Developing Your Photographic Eye and More. And it was a lot about photography tips, of course. But the last tip in the book, I said, the last tip in the book is put the camera down. And someone said to me not too long ago, they said, perhaps that should have been the first tip in the book. And if I were to redo that book, I probably would make that the first tip in the book. And something else I say is that travel photography is two words. Spend as much time traveling as photographing. And don't be afraid to put the camera down. And that's one of the big reasons, because I started out my business as photo tours, actually photo workshops, which are even more hardcore than a photo tour in my mind. It's like 24/7 photography. And some people love to just have that camera in their hands all the time and to be photographing all the time. And I realized that that's not the way that I wanted to go through these trips and to experience these amazing places. So I've kind of pulled back from that idea of photographing all the time. A lot I've pulled back. And now it's more about experiencing the place intentionally.
Yeah, I went through the same thing when I bought a GoPro over a year ago, where the first few months I was recording everything all the time. I was wearing it on my head, wearing it on my chest, going out with it. And then, yeah, it struck me that I was actually prioritizing the recording over my own experience. So I left it at home and I was more present, and that's been better. So I completely agree.
That's funny.
Uh,
Yep.
Yeah, so I'm curious, since you've been through so much, what is your advice for young people today who may want to start a business or they may want to build their life to be financially free or free enough that they can travel, they can do these things, and they can live their life to the fullest rather than waiting for retirement?
Yeah, it's a big question, and every generation, every person kind of goes through it. I heard it from my parents, my family, the older people in my life when I was in my 20s. Save your money, don't waste it on frivolous things. And unfortunately, it went in one ear and out the other. And I think it just does for most people. But I can't tell you how important it is to save money, to not spend it on frivolous things, to invest it. I became a minimalist maybe about 14 years ago, probably before the term even existed. I don't know. But I got rid of, I'll tell you the quick story. I was walking through Toledo, Spain. I knew exactly where I was. And I'm carrying my bag, my bigger bag that I travel with. I was on the road for about 2 months. and my little backpack. And I had been on the road, and I'm like, what else do I need? I've been able to exist for 2 months with these two bags. What more do I really need? And I was paying rent back in Southern California, one of the most expensive places in the world, 12 months, but I was only there 3 or 4 months out of the year total because I was doing these trips. So that's when I decided that I'm going to go become what is now today called a digital nomad. That term didn't exist back then, I don't think. And so, it was about shedding these things that we don't, and that's all they are, is things. I had 600 CDs. I had countless books and clothes out the yin yang. I mean, just stuff. And so it's so important. I like to spend money on experiences, not things now. And I would highly recommend that to younger folks that, invest even $100, $200, $500 a month. Just put it into some sort of a mutual fund, or I like Bitcoin. I know a lot of younger people are into that, but diversify. I'm not giving financial advice, but set that money aside and let it grow for you. Because I had heard years ago that if I had put away like $2,000 a year for 10 years when I was 20 to 30, that's $20,000 that when I turned 60, 65, which I'm 60 right now, you never think you're going to get there, or it's so far away that forget about it. But here I am today, that would have been worth over $1 million. Well, boy, do I wish I had taken that advice.
The power of compound interest.
Absolutely. Yep. And it's so powerful. And the time value of money, so important. Let that money work for you. $20,000 could have been worth $1 million today, and I never would have missed it. And so, gosh, I just, and I've got younger nephews and nieces, and I try to instill that in them. They don't always take my advice because most people never take the advice of older folks, but they're older and wiser, whether you like to think so or not. So invest, save.
Yeah, I actually just
And it just
bought
makes
Bitcoin.
your life.
Yep.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
What's that? I was going to say, it just, the time does pass. You will get to 60, 70, 80. And those are the years that you don't want to be working, or that you want to pull back a little bit and work less and make your money work for you. It's free money. I'm sorry, what are you going to say about Bitcoin?
Yeah, I actually just bought Bitcoin for the first time ever a few days ago. And after looking at it, I was like, oh, I'm just going to buy some Bitcoin every month. I actually bought IBIT, which is like an index fund that tracks Bitcoin, which I'm really glad exists now. I think it only came into effect this year. But that's amazing because it makes it more accessible for people to invest. They don't have to worry about crypto wallets and all of that. They can do it straight from their bank.
Absolutely. Much easier. Yep.
Yeah. And so I plan to invest like, say, a few $100 a month at minimum into it every year. And then by 2026, let's see, right? Because one of my friends who's been helping me invest, he says he's pretty confident conservatively Bitcoin will probably double by 2026. So we'll see. Even if it doesn't,
dollar cost averaging.
Yeah. And
give yourself a time. I gave myself, when I started about 2-3 years ago, of 10 years. I'm not too worried about the fluctuations, the up and downs. When it goes down, I just want to buy more.
Yeah, I love that idea. And I think also one lesson I've learned, so I'm 28 now. I'm going to be 29 in October. And I think advice I would give my younger self is really be willing to invest in your own self, right? So one thing I've read is millennials are more willing to spend money on experiences than things, which is good. But I think maybe for Gen Z and the next generations, there is a big push, especially in our culture, for consumerism, for status, right? Buying these sneakers that are expensive, but they confer this thing. Buying expensive cars. Like I see people getting cars they can't afford because they're getting like 0% financing for X months from the companies who know what they're doing. And then they're driving Uber in these cars so that they can pay the car payment. And I'm just
Oh
thinking
yeah,
you could have just gotten a cheaper car and had your freedom. But instead, you've now bought yourself a job, and not even a very good
that's right.
job. Yeah. Um, but I found
Good way to
things like,
look at it.
sorry, go ahead.
That's a good way to look at it. Absolutely.
Yeah, but I found like I've never regretted buying courses, buying education, buying travel, or even like hiring somebody to help me with the podcast, for example, learning from them, and so on. So like these are things I feel like, because when I think about it, imagine if you think of yourself as a business, and every purchase you make that teaches you something or accelerates your progress or opens your mind is like an investment in your own stock and growing that business. And I realized that I'm capable of much quicker growth than 10% a year or even 100% a year, right? So I really should be investing in myself.
No doubt about it. It's a great way to look at it. Yeah, education is such a big thing, and I don't mean university necessarily, because that can really saddle you with debt and may not help you get the job that you were hoping for. So I'm I've got a master's degree and an undergraduate degree, but I'm not sure that I would do that today, because you can invest in yourself. And now there's so many more opportunities for creating your own small business. It's so much easier today. It's not, it's simple, but it's not easy, to start a business. But there's people that are just going crazy with the online businesses, and it's the opportunities are incredible.
Absolutely. And I didn't go to university. And when I think back and I realize, like, imagine if I just budgeted whatever a university would cost and 4 years of my life to starting and running a YouTube channel. How much would I learn? How much would I grow? How much would I make from that rather than a traditional university education? And I realized, the difference is miles ahead. So I really recommend, yeah, for people to try alternative paths, because I think unfortunately university's gotten more and more expensive and less value compared to alternatives in the market.
Yeah, and people that just live to make money, live to work. I as I got older too, I thought, it doesn't matter how much money you have when you're on your deathbed or you've passed away. Who cares how much money you had? It's how many experiences you had. It's quality of life, not the quantity. I'd rather live a much more quality of life than live till I'm 120, and have a poor quality of life. So look at it that way. I've not become a millionaire doing what I'm doing, but I've had more experiences and met more interesting people and had learned more perspectives from people around the world than 99% of people ever will. And like I said, who cares how much money I have, because I've got those experiences. And people envy my life because it sounds so great, and it is. But that's how I've decided to spend my time and capital.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I have a friend who's 48 years old, and he is now financially independent. And it took him about 15 years of consistent saving and investing. And it all started when he read a blog post by a guy called Mr. Money Mustache. And the blog post was very simple. It was just him writing about how you can basically retire in X years based on the percentage of your savings compared to your income, or rather your expenses, like whatever your expenses in retirement will be. So let's say you're able to save 50%, then I think you can retire in like 11 years or something like that. Um, and so that really shows that even if you're not earning that much, assuming you can save a good amount and keep your expenses low, you will be able to retire. So it's accessible to anyone. And my friend was able to do that. So now he's losing his job and he has no worries about it. He's completely free. The thing that would cause a lot of people stress doesn't stress him out at all. And he can do whatever he wants with his life, which I think is the ultimate freedom. Um, and I agree with you.
You
Money's
said
just
it.
not that, it's not that important as long as you can pay your bills, right? As long as you're able to put food on the table.
Yeah, and people, they make more money, they get a raise, and they say, "Well, I'm going to buy a better car. I'm going to get a bigger house. I'm going to do this or that." And so you just keep hitting up against that ceiling, and you're never saving anything, and you're just going backwards because you're probably getting more in debt.
Yeah.
So you're in a way becoming less wealthy.
Yes.
And so I think that's something that we learn over time too.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Dave Ramsey show on YouTube, and he gets calls from people who are like earning 300, $400,000 a year, and they are broke. They're in debt, they're underwater, they're considering bankruptcy, and I'm just thinking like, wow, we have a really predatory culture and system that encourages you to buy far more than you can afford, and it really hurts people. So I'm definitely a big proponent of financial education, financial literacy for young people, because I think these traps are very insidious and they play on some of our greatest emotions, right? Like insecurity and fear of not being adequate and so on, where we think that we have to
And
buy
keeping up
these
with
things. Yeah.
yeah, keeping up with the Joneses, and that guy's got that. I want that. I need to wear better clothes, and it's just stuff, just
Yeah.
stuff.
And studies have found that, for example, people would rather earn 50K a year and have everyone in their social circle earn 40K a year so that they're ahead comparatively, rather than earning 60K a year more objectively, but everyone in their circle is earning 70K a year. But then, they're behind and they wouldn't want that. So it's human
That's
psychology.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what is your advice for young people on taking risks?
Take calculated risks. I've always been someone I have never been married. I don't have children. So the only thing I risk is myself. Now, if you've got a family, kids, wife, husband, you have to take into account other people. But um, I think taking calculated risks is a good idea. It's the only way you're going to improve or find that one thing that really hits. So I enjoy taking risks, but so I don't think that unless you do something stupid, you can hardly go wrong, because if something doesn't work out, you just learned what didn't work out, and you've learned a valuable lesson. Hopefully, it didn't cost you too much, but there's always a lesson there to be learned to help you with the next thing. So that would be my advice for sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So, take risks that are more likely to pan out than not, and also where the downside is not big enough that you can't take more risks in the future, right? So, it's small enough that you survive the hit and you can keep moving forward.
That's right.
Perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you have any role models or people who you look up to that you recommend other people check out?
Well, one obvious one is someone like Steve Jobs, who, again, I think he died at what, 54 or 57, and was one of the most creative and well known and richest people in the world. But just the other day, I read something about his, on his deathbed, talking about, who cares how much money I have? I would give it all for another year. Or, I'm not sure exactly what he said, but you hear about people that are like that. No one on their deathbed wish they had worked more. They just wish they had enjoyed life more. So Steve Jobs is someone that I look up to. People that have gone through a lot of things. I always enjoyed reading Bill Gates. I love biographies, the Wright brothers, things like that. Just people that have uh, gone through a lot of problems and made incredible uh, decisions and inventions and discoveries that are so powerful. So I look up to that. I don't have any mentors in my industry. I wish I would have. I think mentors are a really great way to learn from other people's mistakes. And I just never found anyone to sort of be a mentor for me. But I um, I highly recommend having a mentor because, like I said, it's someone that you can go to that would help you with hard questions, that's gone through things that you've gone through, perhaps, and that could help you avoid making the decisions that they've made. I've always been a big proponent of learning from other people's mistakes. Why make mistakes that other people have made and that you can learn from and not, take the hit from. So,
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. About the Wright brothers, I remember reading that there was some journalist, maybe for the New York Times, who had written just a few weeks before the Wright brothers did their thing. He had written, even in 100 years, we won't crack human flight. And then here, a few weeks later, two brothers who owned a bicycle shop, they solve it. And I remember there was another guy working on it. He had like a ton of money from the government, and he had some of the smartest people working for him, and they couldn't figure it out. And these two brothers with a shoestring budget figured it out. So it kind of goes to show that, innovation can come from anywhere.
it's incredible because, what was that, like 1903, I think, that they kind of cracked that nut. And, here we are, just a little over 100 years later, and we're talking supersonic, we're landing on the moon, and it's just incredible the innovation and the steps that we've made, the strides that we've made, especially in that field. I've got my pilot's license, so I'm so appreciate the science behind flight, and just love that book that is a Walter Isaacson wrote, I think, about the Wright brothers. Highly recommended.
Yeah, I'm a fan of biographies too. I think the most recent one I read was of Elon Musk, and that was really interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, I definitely think these visionaries and people, there's value in figuring out how their mind works and what makes them so driven to change the world, even through tens or hundreds of failures, right?
Oh, for sure.
What were some of the biggest failures that you persevered through, and that, looking back, you're actually kind of grateful for them because they taught you these lessons?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of failures, and I think because I've tried so many things, you can kind of take that one job and just stick with it and let it be safe, but perhaps you won't be fulfilled because you didn't really step out and take some chances, some risks. But I've tried a lot of different things, and I finally found this one that the organizing and leading tours that allows me to get paid to travel. But I've also made a lot of mistakes in this business because, again, I figured it out myself. That was, why I created the course. Was, right now I'm selling it for $499, but initially it was a $900 or $1,000 course, and I would have paid $1,000 all day long to learn what I put into that course 10, 12 years ago. And the mistakes that I would have avoided, the time I would have saved, the money I would have not spent, would have paid back that course of, thousands of times over. So, um, but in the course I talk about, there's this one story that I call it the pain in Spain. And it was early on. If I've been doing this 16 years, it was maybe 14, 15 years ago, one of my first trips. I said, I want to sidestep the middleman and just go directly to the hotels, to the guides, to the restaurants, the transportation companies, and put this trip to Spain together myself. And so in the end, I realized that I had to speak to 36 different vendors to get pricing, to tell them why they should work with me, who I was, tell my story. Um, when instead I could deal with one person that has those contacts and just tell them exactly what I'm looking for. And they're an expert in that place already, because I work with tour operators in the destination. And so that was one of the best lessons I ever learned, was because that was a failure. The trip actually happened, but like I said, I had to deal with 4 different hotels, transportation companies, guides in each place, activities that we wanted to have, airport transfers. So every one of those is a different vendor. So why not deal with one person who already has all those contacts? And that's what I do now. And I'm glad to pay them for that service, that middleman. They deserve every penny they make.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. They're adding value by reducing just, the how much communicating you have to do and managing between all these people. They have their own system for it, and it works for them. Um,
You said it.
yeah. What are the common mistakes you see first-time travelers make?
The thing that comes to mind, well, obviously, is like overpacking. I People think that I'm, the perfect packer because of everything that all the travel that I've done, but I'm not the best packer, to be honest with you. I tend to overpack. However, the reason I do is that when I'm often gone for 2 or 3 months at a time, but I don't want to wear the same 5 shirts or the same one pair of shoes or 5 pairs of underwear for 2 months. So I want a variety of shirts. I want 3 or 4 pairs of shoes, and different things. So I tend to overpack it. It just makes me comfortable because I'm literally bringing my home with me. But on a bigger scale, the thing that it's really important to understand the culture when you go to a place, needing to uh, be a good citizen of the world when you go to a place. Again, not going there expecting for it to be like home, because that's, why not stay home and save a bunch of money? Because when we go there, I want to understand the people. I don't go there to try to change the place. A lot of times, we'll go to a place like Cuba. I've done Cuba now 19 times with groups, and these are fully licensed trips, all government sanctioned and everything. Go through the front door. But when we go there, people see a lot of issues, what we would call problems, and they want to go down there and they just want to fix them. And number one, you're not going to be able to do that. You're just going to get frustrated, and you're probably going to look like an ugly American or wherever you're from, trying to change someone else. It's one thing to have good ideas and to try to help, but to go down and just try to, just complain about, boy, they should do this. Why don't they do that? Boy, if I was here, I would do this. It's like we're there to learn from them, to experience what they're going through. If we can help, great, but don't come in there trying to change people.
Makes a lot of sense. And I've heard funny stories of people going to foreign countries and complaining that they don't speak English there, which is just some
Yeah.
of the greatest entitlement I've heard of. Um,
Oh my gosh. You said
yeah.
it.
Are there any places you'd want to visit that are usually sort of not accessible, like North Korea, for example, or other places?
Yeah. One place that I always wanted to go to was Syria. And I watched a travel show about, I don't know, 15 years or more ago, and it just looks so beautiful and interesting, and the history and the historical sites and things. I really wanted to go there, but unfortunately now it appears that it's just been, obliterated. Ukraine was another place that I was supposed to go to right after the war happened. I had a trip planned there that August, and I think the war happened, say, in March. And that's another really up and coming destination that was sort of the new place that people wanted to bring groups to and to travel to. And now I think they've been set back 20 or 30 years, and it's such a shame. Um, as far as a destination I'd like to go to, I've been to Tokyo, but I'd like to see a lot of different parts of Japan that I haven't been to other than Tokyo. But yeah, that Middle East fascinates me a lot. I've been to only to Northern Africa, Morocco, and Egypt, but there's some other countries in Africa I'd like to see. So it's a small world, but or the saying goes, Susan Sontag says, "I haven't been everywhere, but it's on my list."
Yeah. I actually grew up in the United Arab Emirates, which a lot of people don't know about. So, I have to say Dubai, and then they're like, oh, I know that place. Um,
Yeah,
and it's an interesting place for sure. That was before we came to Canada, my family. But it's definitely more of a tourist destination. So, like, living there is different than the tourist experience.
I would think so. Yeah. And so, is there any sort of a historic center there, an old town or anything, or is it just all modern buildings now?
I actually don't know. There might be some sort of heritage stone buildings. Like I remember me and my friend, we used to bike around, and there was this one place that didn't look super new or modern. It was kind of like stone walls. And they would like sacrifice goats there on certain seasons. And I remember we saw them cut the neck of a goat open, and it was pretty traumatizing. But looking back, it's an interesting experience. And so they did have these sort of
Yeah.
open markets and things like that. So I think there are still some pockets, but my understanding is it started out as like these 7 tribes or something that all had their own chiefs, and then there was one chief who united all of them, and he sort of became the sheikh, and then it became a country. And I think they're investing like trillions of dollars really in some of the best infrastructure and water and like growing greenery in the desert and so on. Also, I don't know if you've heard, Saudi Arabia, I think, is building a huge city called the Line, and it's literally just like in a straight line down the desert. Uh, yeah, you should look it up. It's
Like
it's an architecture.
one road down the middle.
I think there is a main road, and it's very
Oh my
vertical, so
God.
it's got multiple levels, and there'll be one train that runs down the whole thing. Um, I think there will be multiple roads because it's fairly wide, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. And I know the Middle East also built like palm islands, right? Like artificial islands.
Yes. Yeah.
So they're
Is that
trying to do.
Dubai?
I'm not sure. It might be. It
Yeah.
might be.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
forget.
hmm And then they've got some of the
Interesting. Yeah.
tallest buildings in the world as well.
Yes, I've heard of Oman is really wonderful. I've not been there.
Yeah. I think one interesting thing my family visited when I was young was like an ice hotel. So the hotel and the restaurant bar and the seats were all made of ice. So that was interesting.
Was it in Dubai or was
I
it
think it was in
like
Ras Al
in
Khaimah.
Lapland?
It was in Ras Al Khaimah, which is one of the Emirates, one of the 7 Emirates.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's an interesting place. I
Could-
recommend visiting it. You probably get a lot of value
Okay.
out of not Dubai, but the other Emirates, because I think they're kind of overlooked.
Yeah, I would think so.
So yeah, I mean, it's been great having you on, Ralph. Thanks for being on. Where can people find you? Where can they find your stuff? Where should they go?
Sure. So people can go to continentaldrifter.co. That's sort of the hub of everything. You can find my YouTube channel there, or if you want to go to youtube.com/continental drifter. But on my website, I've got all my trips are listed there. I've got a blog, the a gallery of photographs from my trips. So I'm trying to build up a nice, robust, and very information filled website that is sort of the hub for everything. But people can also look for me on Facebook, either Ralph Velasco or slash the Continental Drifter, and Instagram at Ralph Velasco. But love to connect, and people are interested in those trips. Again, they're small groups, anywhere from 6 to 10 people or so. I lead all my trips, so I'm on every trip. They're a little bit more pricey than other trips that people might find, but that's the reason that I'm on every trip. trip. So I make sure that everything is, just perfect, but also they're small groups. So the smaller the group, typically the more expensive the trip. So 6 to 10 people is a nice intimate trip. And what that allows us to do is to stay at smaller boutique hotels, use smaller vehicles, experience and eat at smaller restaurants that are more local. These big bus tours, they tend to go to huge hotels and huge buffets for, to feed that amount of people. So I like to have a much more intimate experience and not be moving around a whole country, but to do a deeper dive into one, maybe two places, and then just do a hub and spoke from there.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll put those links in the description as well. And also, with your recent trip to Antarctica, does this mean you have been to every continent on the planet?
I have. That was my seventh continent now.
Nice. That's awesome. So, if there was a trip to Mars, do you think you would try it?
I don't know. I love space, but I'm very claustrophobic, so I couldn't imagine sitting in a space capsule. At least the ones that you see today. If it was more like an airplane, potentially, but I think, man, oh man, they talk about even just a 14-hour flight to Singapore is getting old. So to have to do that for, I don't know, months or years to get to a place, I don't know if I would. I don't think I would.
Fair enough. All right, Ralph, take care. It's been great chatting with you.
Thank you very much. Really nice to be here. Thanks so much.